Welcome to Through a Glass Dimly, a podcast where I talk about the truth and the lies we believe. This podcast is sponsored by Sophie's Dream Incorporated, a nonprofit to help people heal from trauma and PTSD through the arts. If you find this podcast beneficial to you, please consider donating to www.sophiesdream.org. SOPHIESDREAM.org. Thank you for your generous tax-deductible donation and enjoy the podcast. Somewhere Over the Rainbow, Part 2. This is the second part in a series where I discuss the film industry and what it is like behind the scenes for celebrities, and also to share some of my stories. I also discuss some of life's realizations in seeking that somewhere over the rainbow. Over my life, I've had many dreams and goals, and so many of those came true with a lot of faith, courage, perseverance, and an incredible amount of hard work. There have been amazing, great opportunities that I have experienced in my life. At the same time, I didn't really have anyone warning me of the things I should avoid or protect myself from. I just thought that whatever I do, if I work hard and do the right thing, my life will go well. The problem is, many people think they are doing the right thing like I did. We are right according to our own perspective. We don't know what we don't know. We make false assumptions based on not understanding all sides of the situation. We are perceiving our life through lenses of the knowledge we do have. My ignorance and naivete was what got me into the worst of situations without realizing how I got there or how to get out of them. I remember during college, after studying fine art, photography, and graphic design, my dream was to work at a big advertising agency. I saw in the movies the exciting, creative life of working on commercials and colorful advertisements in a nice office on an upper floor of a big high-rise overlooking the city of Los Angeles. I was realistic about my dreams of being a famous fine artist right out of school. I knew I needed to use my artistic skills in a commercial way in order to pay my bills. My brother, who is also an artist, would later accuse me of selling out, but then he apologized years later after realizing in his own life just because we use our artistic talents in different and non-traditional ways to make a living doesn't mean we are selling out as an artist. Right after I graduated, my dreams did come true. I always seemed to know what I thought I wanted to make me happy, and I would pray and work hard towards those goals, and God would be so kind as to oblige me in my wishes. I got a job in one of the tallest buildings in Los Angeles, in the Mid-Wilshire district. It has 73 stories. My office was on the 39th floor overlooking the City of Angels. What a great view. Nevertheless, people don't tell you how long you have to wait for the elevator at the bottom in order to get up to your office. I had to allow at least 30 minutes before I was expected to be at my desk. Of course, the time waiting for the elevator to go home after a long day took even longer for some reason. I landed a job at one of the top advertising agencies in the country at the time. It was an entry-level position as an administrative assistant in which I was promised to move up the ladder to my career goal of creative director someday. I learned that many advertising agencies at the time were set up this way. Everyone starts at the bottom and gets promoted to the position they want, with having to sacrifice a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in return. This also happens in the film industry as well. My starting pay was just $12,500 a year. Even back then, it was a terrible salary rate. On top of my school loans and high rent in Los Angeles, it cost me over $100 a month just to park my car at work. I had to walk at least 3 to 4 blocks from the parking lot to the building. I remember crossing the crosswalk one day on the way to my office when I had a conversation with the panhandler. He told me he made $40,000 a year begging on that street corner. tax-free no less. I thought to myself at the time, I'm in the wrong business. My first week working on the new job, I remember taking a lunch break while all the others in the office stared at me like I was nuts. I obviously was ignorant of the protocol. I soon learned that no one took breaks or lunches there. You needed to ignore those little legal benefits and slave through lunch to get points with an impossible boss. Apparently working just 8 hours a day for your salary was another faux pas. You dare not leave the office until you worked at least a 10-hour day. That is a very long time without breaks or lunches. No one dare complain or say anything because
you should be grateful you landed such a prestigious position in our very renowned agency.
I would eventually experience the same kind of abuse while working at a number of well-known Hollywood studios as well. They would use their status in the industry as an excuse to overwork and underpay their artists and employees. It is committing career suicide if you blow the whistle, because if you do, you will never work in Hollywood again. There was so much competition in the advertising agency, backstabbing was the weapon of choice. Since I refused to gossip, I led a very isolated existence there. I would just quietly do my work, but didn't participate in the catty chatter at the water cooler where everyone enjoyed shredding others' characters behind their backs with their words. I was miserable. I felt betrayed by the brochure. I guess advertising agencies are great at selling a bill of goods. I didn't last more than 6 months. At home, I would try to come to grips with comparing my fantasy dreams as a child and student and plans for my future and the true realities of living those dreams out in the workplace. There was so much disillusionment there. I would end up spending decades making new dreams, thinking that happiness and contentment must be somewhere else or someplace else. There must be somewhere over the rainbow. I just had to find it. I would make decisions based on my perfect dreams and suffer the consequences for not having considered them in a realistic way, considering the cons as well as the pros. I ended up getting another job right on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood at a smaller advertising agency, but with very well-known accounts. The building was a streamlined modern structure that looked like a boat and was built at the height of the Art Deco era in the 20s. It had a beautiful office and courtyard. Everything about it looked great on the outside. I was the assistant to the president, which was a very glamorous title, but in reality, I was bored stiff. The boss would give me some letters to type, and I would finish within the first hour. The next 8 hours were torture for me, just sitting there, nothing to do, the phone not even ringing. I was bored out of my mind. At the agency, my goal was account executive or creative director, and I knew those who held those positions started there at the bottom like me. I only needed to work there for 12 to 18 months before a promotion. I could do this. I can endure somehow until I get a promotion. I started bringing books to read just to get through the day, but even reading books all day can get old. I remember one account executive that worked there had the Estee Lauder account, which included a very popular fragrance and perfume line. At the time, I would sacrifice anything for a position like that. Yet he would stumble down the hall, spending sometimes an hour locked in the bathroom, and I eventually found out he had an uncontrollable cocaine addiction. One time he staggered out of the office, wove back and forth down the hall to where I was sitting, and slurred his words and said, "I haven't eaten in 3 days." He hadn't even gone home in a few days, working all day and all night at the office. I begged him to get some help. I told him the company would pay for him to go to rehab, as he was the best account executive there. I was ignorantly optimistic, and he probably knew they would never do that and would fire him instead. I remember being on the other side of the bathroom door, crying tears for him, calling his name repeatedly, hoping he wasn't dead inside from an overdose. His intermittent groans told me he was still alive. He had sacrificed his health and his life for that account and that job. Like so many others in Tinseltown, he had no home to go to, no family to see, because no one had time to have a personal life at all. So many who came to Hollywood to pursue their dreams were here alone with family very far away. He probably started using cocaine to just stay awake, to get all the work done he was demanded to do, and it ended up taking over his life and becoming his escape and a way of surviving. I remember the owners of the agency flying into rages over the smallest things. Sometimes I was screamed at and blamed for the employee refrigerator being too full of everyone's lunches, like it was my fault. It's only at the time I'm writing this that I'm realizing that account executive was probably experiencing those rages and threats behind closed doors by his bosses and felt very trapped. I often would hear them screaming at their employees so loud the walls would shake. I don't know why I put up with it, except it was a familiar thing for me. I grew up with a father that would fly off the handle, it seems, at least once a day about something small, and not only scream at the top of his lungs, but use his body as a weapon on us to vent his anger. So here I was, a kid, a few years out of college, trying to swallow a huge dose of reality. Even a person with a dream job can be miserable if they're not treated right. I often wonder what happened to that account executive and so many others who ended up becoming a slave to so many idols in Hollywood. It was at this time I started having panic attacks. They would come out of nowhere. I was usually in a dead stop in traffic, sitting for an hour or more not moving, or in a crowded bar where people were pushing and shoving, trying to make room for their bodies in a small enclosed space. It was an uncontrollable, claustrophobic, smothering feeling of my life spinning out of control. I had no idea what it was, but I couldn't breathe. My heart raced out of my chest, and all I could feel was that I was trapped with no place to escape. Memories of almost being smothered to death at a circus when I was a small child came back, as well as almost drowning in the ocean when I was just 3 years old. Memories of real, physical, dangerous events I experienced came back to my mind at a time where my emotional life was being smothered to death. It was a metaphor that I was trapped in, and I couldn't understand it at the time. I just knew I had all of these emotions and events that I couldn't reasonably process. All of my hard work at school and the reality of the workplace wasn't anything I thought it would be. I have experienced and observed that we spend so much time and effort trying to reach that rainbow, thinking it's going to be that magical land of Oz where there's only peace, joy, rest, and lollipop kids. When making lifetime goals, many times we focus on the pros and don't research the cons or the sacrifices one needs to achieve our dreams. We tend to focus on someday or somewhere I will be happy. When I have my dream job, I'll be happy. When I find that husband, I'll be happy. When I buy that house, have a family, buy that beautiful car, that dress, etc., I'll be happy. Someday, I'll be happy. I have learned with everything there is good and bad. I have learned that someday is not a day of the week, and it isn't a place you go to or a thing you buy or possess. I have learned with everything there's a positive side and a negative side. There is always a sacrifice that is made. There is always a choice, even though many times we don't think we have one. I think about all the little girls around the world who have been brainwashed by the film industry to have the dream of becoming a princess when they grow up. Why? Because in the movies, only the bright side is shown. Only the positive aspects of being a princess are laid out in the cute little animated features full of bright colors, happy songs, and beautiful dresses. They don't ever show the fact that a princess has no privacy, and like Princess Diana before her, Meghan Markle is now getting a huge dose of reality when it comes to the real life of a princess. She can't even sneeze wrong without the media slaughtering her character. They forget she has feelings like everyone else, and with each attack on his wife, Prince Harry gets a shot in the heart, reminding him that the media killed his mother, both mentally and physically, and took her away forever. I just recently read an article that Princess Anne had almost 350 public service events she had to attend last year. Can you imagine? Can you imagine that side of life of a princess? It's not a life where you're sitting and sipping tea and eating crumpets all day, picking out the next beautiful gown for the royal ball. There's this ungratefulness for being present and enjoying the daily lessons and relationships and what we already have now. We lack appreciation for the simplicities of life. We spend our whole life as a child where we can't wait to grow up, and we spend our whole life as an adult reminiscing about going back to childhood again. Specifically, I believe a lot of people who have dreams of going into the film and entertainment industry only see it from the finished project's perspective. They see it as the Technicolor land of Oz where everyone is dancing around happy, fulfilling their life as an artist with other happy people. They don't realize how it really is from being behind the scenes, or what it feels like to work 16 hours a day for months on end without a day off. Most don't understand that when you are working on a project, you are only doing your job amongst many players, and you don't even have any idea what the finished project is going to look like when completed. I worked on a film for over 3 years at a studio, and they didn't even give the artists a free screening of the movie when it wrapped. We actually had to buy a movie ticket at the theater to see the finished project we worked on for so many years. I always thought it was so ironic that I was working on a family film about having family time together, and how everyone on it was sacrificing their own time with their family to get the project done. I even worked at a studio that would fire the women as soon as they learned they were pregnant. People come to Hollywood dreaming of Oz, but they have no idea how lonely it is to not have time to see friends or family or get-togethers because of a deadline. I was one of those people, the one who only focused on the rainbows and sunshine. I wasn't prepared for the reality of how much I would have to sacrifice for my dreams, but God gave me the desires of my heart anyway. When I look back on so many goals I made, so many ideas I had, I always thought I knew what would make me happy. I have discovered happiness isn't out there somewhere. There is no perfect job, perfect relationship, perfect place to live. You can't go anywhere and have your life end up perfectly. Yet it took a very long time to finally get it, and unfortunately, some never do. So I continued my search for the rainbow. At the time, I was starting to feel very empty, that none of my jobs were at all creative. My schedule was filled with doing left-brain things while wishing the whole time I was painting or creating art. Through a friend, I learned about this new thing called computer graphics. She had just gotten a job as an artist working on a big computer system. This appealed to me. This would be my ticket. Make enough money to pay my bills and buy art supplies. That was my small goal. So I got the contact person from her, wrote a letter, sent my resume, and got hired right away. Even artists at the company had to start out in the accounting department. If they did a good job, they would get promoted as an artist. At the time, I thought this was a dumb idea, but I probably wouldn't know as much about bookkeeping and accounting if I didn't get that experience. I actually did well, a lot better than I thought I would. And after 4 months, I got promoted and trained as an artist. The only position available was third shift. So I worked in the Mid-Wilshire district from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. I learned so much about production and pipelines and deadlines, as well as learning a turnkey $100,000 command line-based computer graphics system. It was a perfect job that fulfilled both my left brain and right brain aptitude. I worked there for a little over a year, and in that time I learned everything that I needed to learn about that position and company. I felt like if I stayed in Los Angeles, I would go nuts due to the pressures of the long hours, high cost of living, and impossible traffic. So I decided I wanted the simple life. to move to the Midwest where there is nature and no traffic. Ha! God granted me my wish and desire again, and I became a consultant and set up a computer graphics division of a large corporation in Wisconsin. I was only 25 years old at the time. Leaving my friends and family, I found myself feeling like I couldn't relate to anyone there. I joined the local musical theater guild and church, clubs, was a singer in 2 bands, competed in bodybuilding, was doing everything to try and connect with people, but it wasn't working. I couldn't relate to anyone there. I dove into my work and had a work schedule of at least 12 hours a day. After a big snowfall, it would take 5 hours of shoveling my car out of the driveway just to go to work. I realized that this was not the simple life I thought I wanted. There was nothing simple about taking 5 hours just to get out of your driveway. After spending 5.5 years dealing with minus 30-degree winters and muggy, mosquito-infested, thunderstorm-filled summers, and feeling like I couldn't relate to anyone, I missed California so much. I kept saying to myself, there's no place like home. A relationship I was involved in had died a slow death, and there was no chance of it resurrecting. At the same time, any possibilities for moving up in the company with exciting and creative positions or projects was not likely unless hell froze over or there was a heat wave in the middle of winter in Wisconsin. Not at that insurance company anyway. Once again, I felt stuck. Time to move forward. A movie had just come out that was made by ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, a visual effects company where the Star Wars franchise was created by George Lucas. The film was called The Mask with Jim Carrey. I bought a movie ticket, and as I was sitting in the theater, I was completely captivated. I couldn't believe what I saw. The new things that were achieved in visual effects on that movie fascinated me. Not only was it creative, but it was using the latest technology to achieve amazing images that looked real. I had a new dream. My next goal was to be a visual effects artist in film. So I did what I needed to do to get back home to SoCal. I made a few connections and got a job where the guy who owned a digital printing shop would teach me Photoshop in exchange for me working for free. This was 1993, so I packed up my things and headed back home. I started out with jobs where I was slowly learning other computer graphics programs and worked in CD-ROM entertainment for a while. It trained me to create and design 3D environments on the computer. At home, I would burn the candle at both ends, having clients that needed multimedia presentations done. I had quite a few corporate accounts. I ended up working with a guy who was getting into the technology of virtual reality. This was 1994. We worked together on the first film that included virtual reality, Virtuosity. It starred Denzel Washington and Danny DeVito. This was my first film that introduced me to working in feature films as an artist using computer technology. It was an exciting time of learning as well as a very isolating time. With every project that came my way, I had to solve big problems that had never been done before. It took a lot of time and focus. I remember going out with a guy and he was over watching a movie until late. A client called me at 1 a.m. and he said, "I can't keep going out with you. You're still taking calls from clients at 1 a.m.? You're a workaholic." He had no idea that that's what it takes to break into anything. You have to work really hard, sacrificing a lot. If you have a spouse and a family, you have to realize that they have priority over any other dreams you may have. That is why people can't take lightly getting married and having kids. You can't sacrifice them for your dreams anymore. That's not fair to them. So many times families and marriages ended up on the cutting room floor, along with all the time and money spent on shots that no one will ever see. Sometimes the pressure is too much for people to try and maintain both family and work, and their only coping mechanism is to reach for drugs or alcohol. So the hours working and discovering new technologies required a lot of time that didn't allow for personal life. The life was so isolating and lonely. I was sacrificing so much in my life for my dreams, mostly time with friends and family. I lived in a beautiful Spanish-style 3-bedroom house in Pasadena that I rented and never had time to enjoy. I worked mornings from 8 or 9 a.m. until 10:30 p.m. to midnight or even later every night. I lived there for 7 years without even knowing any of my neighbors. I would be working in a dark cubicle smaller than my car for 12 to 16 hours a day, only to go home to an empty, dark house just in time to go to bed and do it all again the next day. I didn't have time to date or have relationships except for long-distance ones that only required my time on the weekends. Over all these years of living my dreams, I wasn't satisfied. The hunger I felt was to be truly known, to connect on a deep level and have someone really understand me, to feel like I can relate not only on an intellectual level, but also on a spiritual one as well. If I related on an intellectual level with someone, they were usually atheists or held other beliefs that weren't in line with mine. If I connected with someone on a spiritual level, I felt this vast void of not being able to converse about the scientific, logical, academic things I found so fascinating. I still struggle with connecting with people who have both the passion for learning the scientific and the spiritual together. I found myself in this superficial world called the entertainment industry, where everyone puts on a mask and they are afraid to show who they really are on the inside. I reached a point in my career where I felt I was missing out on having a personal life. I wanted to settle down and have a family. I was getting to an age where time was running out fast. I was burned out and I was ready for less complicated life, not ever realizing there is no life that isn't complicated in some way. I met my husband on a popular internet dating site. He claimed to be a Christian. He told me all the things I wanted to hear, and I believed him. He was a smooth talker. We talked about being missionaries and homeschooling our kids. I told him I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, and he even told me if we had a boy, he would name him Noah. He rushed me down the aisle, but convinced me not to have a big wedding, but to get married by the justice of the peace instead. He promised a big reception when we got home. That, along with everything else, was a lie. Needless to say, nothing he said was remotely true. He just wanted someone who made a lot of money to pay his bills and someone to own and control. My dreams of having a family quickly came to a screeching halt because after we married, he told me he never wanted to have kids, and that conversation we had before we got married never occurred. Not only was I perceived as a slave at work, but I was perceived as a slave by my own husband. I was never allowed to rest because I was required to keep a full-time job, which in the film industry is 12 to 16 hours a day, and I had to do everything to run the household, all the cooking, cleaning, shopping, bill paying, laundry, dishes, with no help from my husband, except his generous contribution of taking the trash to the street once a week. I had no time to rest. When we first married, he told me to fire my cleaning lady. She had been my cleaning lady for 7 years. I told him I needed her because he refused to contribute by helping out. During this time, I had planned a vacation reunion to Europe with my friends. This had been scheduled for a year. A few weeks before the trip, my passport, Social Security card, old driver's licenses, my birth certificate, all went missing. My husband convinced me it was the cleaning lady who did it. And of course, he was my husband, so I believed him. I fired her. She begged and pleaded with me that she would never do such a thing. It was only years later, and after many things happened that prevented me from having any source of income or freedom, that I realized my husband was behind all these strange events. This is how they control. They isolate and prevent you from having any other source of income so that you can't leave. Judy Garland had parents, and then studio executives controlling her life. I had my husband. Like Judy, my talents manifested themselves from an early age. From the time I was barely 2, I loved drawing. I knew all my life I wanted to be an artist. There was no doubt in my mind that it was going to be a huge part of the rest of my life. I believe God gives us desires as children. That desire followed me all through grade school and junior high. I remember my first day of high school so clearly. I was 14 years old and in the bathroom curling my hair with the curling iron. I needed it to look just like Farrah Fawcett's at the time. My dad burst into the bathroom with a loud voice and asked, "Well, do you know what you want to do for the rest of your life for a career?" The question kind of shocked me. I mean, as a 14-year-old, am I supposed to know this? I responded quite sheepishly back, "I don't know, Dad. I think I want to be an artist." He quickly responded with, "You will never make any money as an artist. You're throwing your life away." Little did he know he was cursing me like he did so many times before and since. I remember when I became an artist at Walt Disney Studios, the words he told me kept playing in my mind every single day. Even though I was making a good living as an artist at a company that only hired the best of the best, I felt guilty about it because, according to my dad, I was supposed to fail at this. So if I'm a success at it, I've disappointed my father in some warped way. Believe me, I did. He was never proud of me, no matter what I did. At least he never communicated it to me. What he did communicate was clear disdain for anything and everything I had become. When he cursed me that day, I felt the need to prove him wrong. In so many ways I did. He ended up telling me that I made more as an artist than he did in his whole career. My motivation for success was hoping to seek his approval. But with every success, with every achievement, he pushed the goalpost even further away from me. He was dangling a carrot over a pit, and I fell for it every time. The harder I worked, I would never reach the finished goal in his mind. I would never earn his love and approval for anything I did because he was not capable of love and approval of me. Ever. I was a failure and was always going to be a failure to him. The problem is, we as children are created to believe our Father. We think our Father is telling us the truth all the time, even if He isn't. We live our lives replaying the tapes of our Father throughout our life and then judging our life and success based on these curses or blessings by the one who is in charge of raising us. So many celebrities went against their parents' wishes for them by pursuing their dreams in the arts. Even though they may reach success in those dreams, they still know they are failures to their fathers because they didn't do exactly what the father or mother wanted in their lives. This inner conflict causes so much stress. Just like someone has survivor's guilt, people can have success guilt. If I'm supposed to be a failure and destined by my father to be a failure, what am I doing being a success? I must not deserve it. So many get caught up in the guilt and shame, which leads to self-sabotage. You make decisions that are going to ruin that dream you had because the only way to really please your abusive father is to be a failure. These actions are not cognitively reasoned out. Many times they aren't even thought about in an introspective way. Much of our actions and decisions are merely reactions to the past based on what we were programmed to be as children. That is why one of the last things Jesus said on the cross was, "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." That is such a true statement. Self-awareness is impossible to achieve if you are so broken and overcome with seeking man's approval for your self-worth. You can't see the forest through the trees. When you look at Whitney Houston, Robin Williams, and others who died tragically by self-induced suicide or drug addiction, and you read about their childhoods, you see that their perception of who they were and the perception of who others thought they were was completely off. No matter how successful you are, if those tapes from childhood keep playing, you will always be a failure. You eventually will fulfill your father or mother's curse. People who grow up with parents like this end up finding a surrogate who repeats the same message to them. Even though I ended up proving my dad wrong, I married someone who repeated that curse, and somehow wives always believed their husbands. Every day I watched him ignore me and listened to him criticize me. He was, in his way, repeating I was a failure. He would make snide comments that would slowly break down my self-worth. Do you even know how to do math? If I mentioned to him something like I forgot to eat lunch, he would always respond with, What are you, a 5-year-old? It didn't matter what I would tell him. Almost daily he would say, What are you, a 5-year-old? And eventually I believed the lies. It didn't matter that I was working in a difficult, high-demand position at Disney or Sony or Nickelodeon. I believed the lies at home. We must remember the person who wants control does it out of insecurity. Your failure is their success because they see you as competition. They push you to succeed to fulfill their own selfish needs, but when you get there, they make you think you failed instead. It makes the victim crazy if they don't wake up and get away from it. The problem is, some people are so trapped in the situation, the only way to get away from this is through drugs or alcohol. No one recognizes, however, drugs and alcohol are just another form of slavery as well. Only by being aware and knowing who you truly are in God's eyes are you free from the chains of slavery that men shackle on you. You may be a slave to your dreams and living an unhappy, unfulfilled life, or a slave to a relationship where you're made to feel like a failure and unable to see your value, or a slave to the messages you heard as a child. We must finally realize that no earthly thing can fulfill us like God can. If at any point my life takes a turn for the worst, and I'm left alone without anyone or anything to temporarily comfort me, I can stand strong knowing the God of the universe is still there with me, holding me up, giving me the unconditional love and acceptance I need to keep going. That is the only thing that has made me survive what I've survived. I finally reached the end of myself and found freedom and unconditional love, peace, and joy. It isn't determined by my circumstances. It's determined by the promises God gives me in His Word. He always keeps His promises, even when everyone else fails us. I would be long dead by now if I put all of my self-worth in what others around me thought of me. Now, you are no longer a slave, but God's own child. And since you are His child, God has made you His heir. Galatians 4:7. You were bought with a price. Do not become slaves of men. 1 Corinthians 7:23. If I knew what I know now, I would have handled my career and life much better. I would have the self-worth to have healthy boundaries, and although I realize the hours in the film industry can be long, I would have more balance and not necessarily accept jobs where there was labor abuse going on. I certainly would not have put up with an abusive husband for 12 years. My faulty theology, believing I had to submit to my husband even if he was evil, was not anything of what God says a marriage should be. I had to get to a place where I took responsibility for my decisions. Not that I was making bad decisions intentionally. I believe most people think they are making good decisions based on their own information and experience, but not realizing their decision-making can be unwise because of abuse, trauma, or bad habits learned in childhood. We have the power to change our lives at any moment. We can learn what we didn't know before, and we can stop doing the things we do that have been destructive in the past. Now that God has shown me my worth, I don't have to allow others to control or abuse me. We have been given the same power that raised Jesus from the dead. Listen to what God tells us. The Spirit of God who raised Jesus from the dead lives in you. And just as God raised Christ Jesus from the dead, He will give life to your mortal bodies by the same Spirit living within you. Romans 8:11. We don't realize that we have more power to control our lives than we think. Judy Garland didn't know her worth or talent. If she did, she wouldn't have allowed people to take over her life and her decisions to where she felt constantly trapped. She was living as a prisoner in her own body, but she didn't have to be. If she only knew the love of Jesus and how much God loved her, she wouldn't allow others to enslave her. Even if we don't feel we have the strength to fight those who are trying to abuse us, we can use the power of the Holy Spirit within us to rescue us from that situation. I remember right after I escaped and found myself homeless, one of my dear friends graciously allowed me to stay at her family's estate up in Northern California for a week. I went to a tiny church in their small town on that Sunday morning, hoping for an encouraging message of hope in my hopeless situation. The Irish pastor recalled a chapter in the famous story The Pilgrim's Progress, written by John Bunyan in 1678. The characters named Christian and Hopeful were held prisoner in Doubting Castle by the king giant Despair. Fear had overcome them, and they did not know how to escape. They started praying, and they prayed all night. Truth and joy began to seep into their hearts. Christian suddenly broke out in passionate declaration. "What a fool I am," he exclaimed, "to lay here in a stinking dungeon when I just as easily could walk out in liberty. In my coat, next to my heart, I have a key called promise. I'm persuaded it will open any lock in Doubting Castle." So they took the key and turned the lock and walked out to freedom. Their prison was doubt, depression, and despair, and that had become my prison as well. I sat there sobbing in the pew of the church building, realizing I had the keys in my hand the whole time to get out of my prison, but I didn't realize it because I had put more faith in my husband's words of fear and doubt than I did in the one who promises to never leave me or forsake me. I may have doubted the love of everyone around me, but I do not doubt the love that God has for me, and it will drive out any fear or doubts that may come my way in the future. Such love has no fear, because perfect love expels all fear. If we are afraid, it is for fear of punishment, and this shows that we have not fully experienced His perfect love. 1 John 4:18. God isn't punishing me. I'm punishing myself for allowing others to make me a sacrifice for their sins. God had kept me safe thus far, and He will keep me safe going forward. For I can do everything through Christ, who gives me strength. Philippians 4:13. Judy Garland didn't have to give in to the temptations of self-destructive behavior. She put more trust in the idols and worshiped them rather than the one who could set her free. God promises to always provide a way of escape if we are tempted, and just trust Him and do the right thing. The temptations of your life are no different from what others experience, and God is faithful. He will not allow the temptation to be more than you can stand. When you are tempted, He will show you a way out so that you can endure. 1 Corinthians 10:13. There were times where I failed and fell into temptation through fear, but I needed to hold on and be strong and stand up. I would tell myself out loud, "Don't do what you feel, do what's right," over and over again. And every time it kept me strong, and God always provided a way of escape, a way of protection. We are not victims, but victors. God gives us a book of wisdom. He tells us we are free. He wouldn't lie. If we trust Him and seek Him, He will tell us our worth. We must use our gifts to not serve ourselves or man, but serve God. If we do, we don't have to bow to unreasonable demands of money-hungry people or spouses. This is not even biblical to submit to such things because it's idolatry. Trust God and seek Him, and He will bring you freedom and joy. So many seek a life somewhere over the rainbow, but the rainbow is within yourself. There's no place like home. It's not out there somewhere. It's within you. When you know that God loves you and is taking care of you, you can be at peace with your life. You can find gratefulness with today and now. He fulfills every need we have and always will. End of part 2, Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Copyright 2019. All rights reserved. Reproduction of any portion prohibited except by permission. Contact feedback@throughaglassdimly.com. Thank you.